Welcome back to Data and Context. I'm Allie Barefoot with Cotality, and we're talking about the Arizona housing market today, a place that's both a real estate magnet and a pressure cooker. Everybody wants to talk about interest rates, right? But there's a quieter threat in Arizona, the heat. Extreme temperatures don't just make you sweat, they can hurt your wallet by driving up utility bills, even damaging your home, which can make a property look less attractive. On one side in Arizona, you have an influx of investment in the real estate market. But on the other side, you have such a brutal heat index that it makes the prospect of living there almost undesirable for many. The two sides seem to be in opposition. But the big question is, which side's going to cool off first? So we're going to break down that data today with Cotality's chief scientist, Howard Botts, and he'll explain how you can invest in Arizona without getting burned. So let's go on ahead and jump into today's questions. Howard, thank you so much for joining us on Data and Context.
Well, thank you, Allie. It's a pleasure to be here today.
Absolutely. You actually have a collaborative article right now on the Cotality Insights page that's called Arizona is Too Hot to Touch. And that's kind of what we're diving in here. I think it's super interesting that Arizona is a booming real estate market, but also driving people away at the same time because the heat is just so brutal. So that's kind of where I want to start this conversation is that, the weather is an extreme factor. So what should potential homebuyers know about the climate and infrastructure risks that could affect their decision to move there?
Oh, that's a great question. And Arizona is certainly ground zero for the impact of climate change on the housing market. And I guess asking a natural hazard risk scientist this question may generate sort of a scary sounding answer, but I think try to give you some realistic kind of facts as to what's going on the ground. Obviously, as you mentioned, extreme summer heat now and in the future is number one issue facing Arizona. We model climate change out to 2050, and we expect temperatures in Arizona to rise significantly. For example, Maricopa County, where you find Phoenix, or Yuma counties, a county down on the border with Mexico, we see extreme heat days increasing 30 to 40% in just 25 years. And for example, Maricopa County, where Phoenix is, will by 2050 have 155 days above 95, 46 above 110, and almost 4 days above 120. Kind of scary when you think about human life and impacts on health. And that is compounded by a few other risks. Certainly, as the environment gets warmer, we tend to consume more water, and water scarcity is a huge issue for Arizona and for home buyers kind of moving into the market. And across the state, really long-term water challenges. All Western states have been over-allocated Colorado River water, for example, and the drought conditions we expect to continue and diminishing groundwater. All of that is very impactful on homeowners to the point now that the state of Arizona requires certain areas like Phoenix to prove, if you're a developer, you have a 100-year supply of water for your new subdivision. And as you might guess, that slowed down construction in some areas. But if you're an existing homeowner, I guess that means increase in your value of your home. And I guess two other quick risks that we worry a lot about at Cotality are wildfire. And certainly as it gets drier and hotter, there are many areas, particularly around the urban wildland interface, where homes abut up against the natural vegetation areas. We see increased wildfire risk. And obviously that translates to higher insurance premiums. And flooding, which I think is kind of counterintuitive to most of us, is a desert for the most part. But Arizona does experience intense flash floods, particularly during the summer monsoon season. And so any new buyers should certainly check what the property's flood risk is And flood insurance, even if you're outside the 100-year flood zone, is not a bad idea.
No, absolutely not. As we have seen that environmental risks and natural disasters, they really just like to go where they please, regardless of what has been typical and atypical to an area. And it's interesting because you mentioned about the water supply, not just as humans, but what you need in your property and in your business. So we know that that can put a bit of damage on your wallet. And beyond water utilities, what part of Arizona's infrastructure, housing, roads, power grids, is most vulnerable to the rising heat? What are the long-term effects of that?
Well, you've definitely identified other major things we need to worry about, new homeowners and existing ones should worry about. Rising heat has a massive impact on the power grid. And, recent studies have shown that if Phoenix were to lose power for 2 days during an extreme heat event, half the population, or about 800,000 people, would require medical attention, obviously creating significant financial impacts and, unfortunately, a lot of heat-related deaths. So I think, people worry a lot about the strength and power and resiliency of the Arizona power grid. Roads, if are particularly vulnerable to physical impact of chronic heat. And we mentioned water earlier. Many of my friends who've moved to Arizona moved there so they can play golf. And a single golf course consumes around 450,000 gallons of water per
Hmm.
day. It would be enough to fill 45,000 swimming pools, to give you an idea, for one golf course.
Gosh.
And finally, I think maybe we don't focus enough on this issue, but uh, we in the kind of the urban built environment world talk a lot about urban heat island effect. And when you build cities, concrete buildings, dark rooftops absorb and store heat during the day, slowly releasing it at night and generating really dangerously high nighttime temperatures. And again, when we talk about the power grid, that means you're unlikely to be able to open your windows and experience a cool night in summer. So all of those are, additional things that go beyond direct heat as an impact on life in Arizona.
We're now in October, and that's one of my favorite things about that fall time is getting to lift my windows a little bit, get a nice 60-degree breeze coming in through my window as I sleep. But I understand that, every area is going to have some climate risks, but there's also a lot of benefits to every single area. Like you said, your friends playing golf. My brother's an avid golfer. He's been to Phoenix multiple times on a guy's trip or just loves the golf courses there. And it turns out that Cotality found that Phoenix actually ranks number 4 nationally for investor home purchases. What do you think makes that state so attractive, despite the golf, obviously, but, despite the growing conversation around the climate risk, people are moving there. Why is that?
Yeah, I think you've captured a dilemma we see nationally. If you look at where people are migrating to, it tends to be the areas with the highest risk. But there's reasons they go there. And aside from just like we talked about recreational aspects, Arizona is really known for its pro business environment. So it has relatively low taxes, streamlined regulations, and it's really a landlord friendly environment. So all of that boosts investment returns. Phoenix is no longer a retirement and tourist based economy, really much more robust, a booming job market. It's become a center for advanced manufacturing, technology, healthcare, finance. And so if you're an investor or an individual, it depends on whether you're looking at your short-term goals or really longer-term risk. And if you're an investor, you typically operate on a 5 to 10 year horizon, and you're not really thinking about necessarily the more far off kind of climate risks as all of these things we've already talked about become more and more extreme. And I think humans in general are really bad at understanding risk. It certainly keeps the lights on in Las Vegas, but most of us kind of hope for a better future, and I think individuals and investors are really betting on adaptations that will figure out ways to make the climate, whether it's better energy efficient infrastructure or other solutions, water recycling, desalinization using ocean water, all of which are going to kind of minimize sort of future risks. So I think it's a robust economy to kind of more succinctly answer your question. It's more diverse economy, and beyond just sort of snowbirds coming there in the winter, we see a sort of a year-round migration to take advantages of all the things I just mentioned.
And it's not uncommon. Cotality's October Home Price Index report found that the housing market right now is being made up of 1/3 of investors. So people are investing everywhere. But we have seen, obviously, Phoenix in the top 5 area nationally as a home for investors. And you talked a little bit about migration, and we know that we're seeing a lot of migration coming from other states such as California. But how does this affect the home prices in Arizona? And what does that mean for first time buyers who are, priced out and so many other US markets are trying to keep up?
Yeah, I think one of the things that's made Arizona attractive is relatively lower home prices compared to California. So I live in an area where recently the Palisades fire came through, and many of my neighbors moved to Phoenix and Tucson or northern Arizona. And they did so in part because when they sold their house, they got significantly more cash from selling their house than they had to pay for property in Arizona. So, there's a price advantage, and it's a plus for Californians. But the flip side of that is, many of my friends have paid more than asking price, offered cash, and ability to outbid local buyers. And tens of thousands of new residents moving to Arizona with a relatively limited supply of houses for the water reason and others we've talked about, uh, have definitely caused medium house prices to surge in some areas by 50%, as Selma Hepp, our chief economist, has pointed out. And this has been a challenge, I think, and may ultimately, for at least the retirement population, slow down growth. For investors, like I mentioned a minute ago, the good news is that for them, that many newcomers want to rent first, and so apartments, single family rentals are really soaring, and I think we see that in the percentage of investor purchased homes in Phoenix and other areas.
And we know there's always going to be a balance, right? Wherever you live, there's going to be a pros category and a cons category. And in your opinion, how do you weigh short-term attractions like sunshine and low taxes in Arizona against long-term threats, like you said, the climbing heat index and water supply?
Yeah, I think most of us, think more in terms of short term, and so uh, the lower taxes, economic diversity, ability, as we talked about, people migrating in, being able to buy low, and having high initial equity are all really positives for people in the short term. And, by short term, maybe now to 5 years from now. But if people are thinking about the long term, there's certainly going to be impacts. It's often easy to buy a house in a higher risk area, but more difficult to sell. And we're seeing that across the country as well as Arizona, time on market, potential reductions in prices in areas that are risky. So I think the longer term, threat really is, will people begin to move out, go to lower cost areas? And we're seeing some of that already, people moving to adjacent states that aren't California to lower cost. Uh, One of the things we haven't talked about, Allie, is really rising energy costs and insurance costs. And for many individuals over the long term, say a 30-year time horizon on a mortgage, insurance, energy, property taxes will greatly exceed what they thought they had as a fixed cost in their mortgage. So that's going to erode individuals' cash flow. And then, of course, the chronic heat, limited water may halt economic activity or slow it down. So I think in the short term, things look pretty good. In the longer term, unless we figure out ways to mitigate the many risks we've talked about, I think it will be impactful on the Arizona economy.
That brings up a great point about the mitigation. And, when everybody tries to budget, as we do every month, very few think of the rising costs and what it may take to mitigate your home, as Cotality shows that climbing heat indexes can definitely make it a bit pricier to insulate a home. So, how can smart designs, such as tree canopies, reflective surfaces, building orientation, how can that help homeowners mitigate their properties in Arizona?
Well, you pretty much just answered the question for me. you know, uh, we talked a little bit about urban heat island earlier and how cities, absorb heat and slowly give that off at night. So urban areas are much warmer than their surrounding rural areas. So, some of the mitigation strategies would be, reflective surfaces, cool roofs, and pavement. Some cities are actually experimenting with painting their streets white to reflect heat rather than absorb heat, which is kind of an interesting idea. Uh, as a homeowner, if you have enough water that you can make some plantings, increasing your tree cover, particularly on the south and west sides of your building or home, will add shade. Obviously, the highest thing, and usually the highest return on investment, is just making sure you have high R value insulation in your home. Uh, but other things like uh, high overhangs over the south facing windows or awnings, all of that will help mitigate at least some of the short term heat issues. And interestingly, we at Cotality, as I mentioned before, build climate risk models. And we look at a lot of the acute risks like flooding or earthquake, wildfire. But lately, we've developed a series of what we call chronic risks, which include heat, cold, drought, and precipitation. Of those, heat is the one that's gotten the greatest interest. And student housing was one that I hadn't thought of, but suddenly we've had a number of Arizona universities reach out to us. You can't move a university, so they need to
Right.
budget to retrofit older buildings. Senior housing is another one. A lot of the real estate investment trusts and other investors that own that are looking for to understand heat and where it's going to go. And the one that's probably surprised me the most that's reached out to us are manufacturing and labor unions, really interested in what are the impact on workers. As you might guess, if you're an agricultural worker,
Right.
that impact is significant. But even in factories and some of these other facilities, figuring out ways to mitigate risks. So, although our focus has been on homeowners, this is related since people have to pay their bills. People are really looking at all the different ways we can mitigate both at the individual structure, multifamily housing, and in the workplace.
Absolutely. I feel when we talk about natural disasters, it's almost easier to talk about the big ones, the hurricanes, the tornadoes, and while those are obviously detrimental to society, a very quiet threat is heat that a lot of the nation does deal with, whether it's as a homeowner or as a business owner. It's a quiet threat, but it is big that can be talked about more and how you can help mitigate your property, a bigger property and such. And I actually have one more question for you, and that is, what should the Arizona homebuyer today think about what to make sure that their home and the investment that it represents is protected for the future?
Yeah, I think that's a great question and touches on really the scope of our conversation. Uh, you know, number one item certainly is to look at the energy efficiency of your home and make sure that you have a high efficiency air conditioning system. Even in California, a lot of my neighbors have all put in backup generators these days, or if they have solar panels, they're installing battery systems in their houses that will allow them uh, during a power outage to maintain the relative air conditioning in their home. So that's critical. You know, checking the building itself. What does the insulation look like? Do you have a cool roof or other reflective surfaces that will reduce the heat load on a property? Some of the passive things we've talked about: roof overhangs, sunscreens, mature shade trees. And one that I don't think is as obvious is, during monsoon season, you can get very intense rainfall. And you want to make sure that you can drain water away from your foundation and that you've done other kind of preventative measures to make sure that you don't risk your foundation shifting and have other sorts of water damage. All of that will hopefully ultimately get you a lower quote on your insurance premium, which is an issue we're seeing across the United States.
I live in Texas, which is not nearly as hot as Arizona, but we have some hot days, and now I am going to be considering painting my driveway white just to at least get some kind of mitigation around my home at lower premiums.
Yeah, I think Texas is another sort of ground zero for this. Like Houston
Right.
is the most air-conditioned city in the world. It even beats Saudi Arabia for most hours of air conditioning. Phoenix and Tucson, Yuma County are not far behind. So, yeah,
Oh, I
you're in good
fully
company.
believe it. Well, thank you again, Howard. This was super insightful. Definitely has given me a lot to think about. I really also thought a lot about what you said about universities and companies and people who work in agriculture. This is not just affecting homeowners, but affecting a society of people that are trying to make a living wage. So definitely given me more to think about. And I hope to have you back on Data and Context to talk more in the future about whether it's Arizona's housing market or another quiet threat that we're seeing here in the United States.
Well, thank you, Allie. We have 49 states and the District of Columbia, so we'll be back frequently.
Oh, I'm sure we have plenty more to talk about. Thank you so much, Howard.
Thank you, Allie. Bye-bye.
Thank you again to Chief Scientist at Cotality, Howard Botts, for breaking down that data for us on today's episode. And thank you guys so much for listening. If you haven't already, hit that subscribe button for me on Cotality's YouTube page. Drop a comment down below. Be sure to leave a like. And as always, if you want to find out more information, head on over to cotality.com.